An alien armada was doomed until Earth answered the call. HFY Sci-Fi story, the dying scream of Admiral Kexthara's flagship cut through the void like a blade through silk. Around her, the last remnants of the Zephyrian Confederacy's grand fleet burned in the darkness, their bioluminescent hulls flickering like dying stars. 27 worlds had fallen to the void-born swarm, billions of her people reduced to nothing more than absorbed biomass, their memories and souls feeding the endless hunger of creatures that existed only to consume. "Admiral," came the trembling voice of Communications Officer Velinara through the ship's failing neural link. "The Hegemony's reinforcement fleet, they're gone. The swarm consumed them 3 sectors out from Altair Prime." Kexthara's 3 hearts hammered against her chitinous chest plates as she absorbed the news. The Hegemony, their oldest allies, the ones who had promised to stand with the Confederacy until the end, devoured like everything else that had dared to stand against the swarm. Her clawed fingers traced the scarred surface of her command throne, each mark a reminder of battles fought and worlds lost. Through the crystalline viewport of her dreadnought, the luminous Defiance, she watched another of her ships die. The cruiser Starweaver's Hope crumbled under the relentless assault of void-born bioships, its hull plates peeling away like flower petals in a hurricane. Plasma fire carved through ancient metal, and the screams of her people echo through the quantum foam. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. 17 combat vessels, Admiral," replied Tactical Officer Thekmara, his usually steady voice cracking with exhaustion and despair. 43 civilian transports carrying the last survivors from the core worlds. Total population, just over 1 million souls. 1 million. Out of the 47 billion Zephyrians who had once called the Andromeda Spiral home, only 1 million remained. An entire civilization reduced to refugees hiding in the shadow of a dying star, waiting for the inevitable moment when the swarm would finish what it had started. The Voidborn weren't just predators. They were entropy given form and purpose. Where they passed, reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Stars dimmed and died prematurely. Planets cracked open like eggs, their molten cores feeding the swarm's incomprehensible appetite. They had swept across 3 galaxies like a plague of living darkness, leaving behind only the cold silence of empty space and the bitter taste of despair. Kexthara had been fighting them for 7 years now, ever since they'd first emerged from the dark matter between galaxies. She'd watched them adapt to every weapon, counter every strategy, consume every defense. They learned from each battle, incorporating the strengths of their victims into their own ever-evolving forms. Her fleet had started with over 3,000 ships. Now 17 remained, and even those were barely holding together. "Admiral," Velinara's voice carried a strange mixture of hope and terror. "We're receiving a transmission. Origin, unknown. The signal is coming from the Sol system." Sol. Kexthara's neural implants access the Confederacy's vast database instantly, a backwater system in an unremarkable spiral arm of the Milky Way, home to a young species called humans, pre-warp, primitive, barely worth cataloging in the great archives of galactic civilization. The kind of species that usually went extinct long before achieving interstellar flight. "Sol system?" Thekmoran's antennae twitched with confusion. "That's impossible. They don't have FTL capability. How could they even know about our situation?" "Put the transmission through," Kexthara ordered, curiosity momentarily overriding her despair. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure that made Kexthara's breath catch in her throat. Human, obviously, but not like the peaceful traders and explorers she'd heard about in scattered intelligence reports. This one wore the unmistakable bearing of a seasoned warrior. Dark skin marked by scars that spoke of battles fought in the void, eyes that held the weight of impossible decisions, and a uniform that radiated military precision. "This is Admiral Zara Okafor of the Terran Defense Coalition," the human said, her voice carrying across the impossible distance with quiet authority. "We've been monitoring your situation for the past 18 months. You're fighting the swarm," Kexthara found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How do you? Humans don't have faster-than-light capability. Your species hasn't even left your home system properly. How are you receiving our transmissions? We don't have FTL, Okafor replied with a smile that was equal parts warmth and cold steel. What we have is something your databases probably don't account for. 3.5 centuries of experience in building really, really good listening posts. We've been monitoring galactic communications since we first detected artificial signals in the 2150s. The human's expression grew serious, her dark eyes reflecting something that made Kexthara's warrior spirit stir despite her exhaustion. We know what the swarm is. We know what they've done to the hegemony, to the crystal dominion, to everyone who's tried to stand against them. And we know you're the last one standing between them and the rest of the galaxy. Then you know we're doomed, Kexthara said, her voice hollow with despair. The swarm is infinite. They adapt to every weapon, absorb every strategy, consume every defense. Even if your people had ships, which you don't, it wouldn't matter. Nothing can stop them. Okafor leaned forward and her eyes blazed with a fire that reminded Kexthara of her own people's ancient war songs. We don't have ships like yours, that's true. But we have something the swarm hasn't encountered before. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of an entire species' determination. We have rage. We have spite. We have the absolute refusal to go quietly into the dark. And most importantly, we have absolutely nothing left to lose. The transmission cut out, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. Kexthara stared at the empty hologram for a long moment, her mind struggling to process what she just heard. A pre-warped species offering to help fight the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever known? It was either the bravest or most foolish thing she'd ever encountered. Admiral, Bellinara's voice cut through her thoughts. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures emerging from the Sol system. Whatever they're doing, it's unprecedented. The quantum distortions are off the charts. Show me, Kexthara ordered. The tactical display shifted to long-range scan mode, focusing on the distant Sol system. What she saw defied every law of physics the Zephyrians understood. Massive energy signatures were indeed emerging from Earth's gravity well, but they weren't the clean, elegant warp signatures of advanced civilizations. These were crude, violent, and absolutely terrifying in their raw power. By the eternal flame, Tecmorin whispered, what are they doing to their own star system? The first ships to emerge from Sol's outer reaches looked like they'd been assembled in the workshops of madmen. Not the sleek, biomechanical vessels favored by most spacefaring species, but brutal, functional instruments of war built from what appeared to be repurposed industrial equipment. Asteroid mining platforms converted into weapons platforms. Orbital stations retrofitted with enough firepower to crack moons. And fusion drives that burned so hot they left trails of ionized plasma stretching for millions of kilometers. The lead vessel was a nightmare of human engineering. A hollowed-out asteroid nearly 2 kilometers across, its surface bristling with weapons that violated at least 3 separate galactic treaties on acceptable military force, fusion torpedoes, kinetic kill vehicles, and something that made space itself ripple with barely contained violence. This is the TCDS Defiance. Okafor's voice crackled through the comms system, now carrying the background noise of a ship in active combat configuration. Apologies for the delay, Admiral Kexthara. Had to stop by Mars to pick up some friends. More ships emerged from the inner system, each one more terrifying than the last. Not the elegant vessels of advanced civilizations, but crude, angry instruments of destruction. Ships with names like Retribution, Spite, Unbroken, and Last Stand, each one a testament to humanity's absolute refusal to accept defeat. Admiral Kexthara, Okafor continued, her voice now carrying the calm authority of someone who had looked death in the eye and spat in its face. We're transmitting tactical data now. You know these creatures better than we do. We know war better than you do. Let's see what happens when an unstoppable force meets completely unreasonable stubbornness. The data that flooded these Zephyrian systems was unlike anything in their military archives. Human combat doctrine wasn't elegant or efficient. It was vicious, chaotic, and absolutely terrifying in its simplicity. Where other species sought to minimize casualties and preserve resources, humans seemed to operate on the principle that if you were going to fight, you fought with everything you had. Consequences be damned. They're suggesting ramming attacks, Velinara said, her voice filled with disbelief as she reviewed the tactical suggestions. Direct collision courses with swarm bioships. They want to turn their vessels into kinetic weapons. That's suicide, another officer whispered from across the bridge. No, Kexthara said slowly, studying the projections with growing understanding. It's not suicide, it's murder-suicide. There's a difference. The humans were right about one thing. The swarm had never faced an enemy that deliberately sought close combat. Every other species they'd consumed had tried to maintain distance, to preserve their ships and crews for as long as possible. But these humans, they weren't trying to preserve anything. They were trying to hurt the enemy so badly that the swarm would remember it forever. Incoming message from the Swarm Collective, Communications Officer Velinara announced, her voice tight with fear. The holographic display shifted to show something that still made Kexthara's blood run cold after 7 years of war. A void-born overmind, a creature the size of a small moon, its surface covered in writhing tentacles and biomechanical sensors that gleamed with malevolent intelligence. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to shiver. Zephyrian remnants. The creature's voice was like the sound of dying stars. Your resistance is concluded. Submit to absorption. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our perfection. Before Kexthara could respond, Admiral Okafor's voice cut across the comm channel, calm and conversational. Hey there, ugly. Zara Okafor, Terran Defense Coalition. We haven't been properly introduced. The Overmind's attention shifted, its massive sensory organs focusing on the approaching human fleet. Primitive species, your technology is insufficient. Your resistance is irrelevant. You know what? Okafor replied cheerfully. You're probably right. We are primitive. Our technology is insufficient. But here's the thing about humans. We've been fighting impossible odds since we crawled out of the primordial soup, and we've gotten really, really good at it. The first wave of human ships hit the swarm's outer perimeter like a hammer blow from an angry god. The Defiance led the charge, its asteroid hull glowing white-hot as it punched through a bioship 3 times its size. The explosion lit up the battlefield like a new star being born, and when the light faded, both ships were gone. But the humans weren't done. As their lead ship died, it released its cargo, thousands of smaller vessels that the tactical displays helpfully labeled as boarding pods. Not escape shuttles, boarding pods. They're not retreating, Thekmoran said in amazement. They're attacking from the inside. Kexthara watched in fascination and horror as human warriors carved their way through swarm bioships with weapons that belonged in a museum. Projectile firearms that used chemical propellants. Explosive charges that relied on simple chemical reactions. Flamethrowers that turned living corridors into hellish infernos. The swarm, for the first time in their existence across multiple galaxies, experienced something they'd never known: confusion. These new enemies weren't trying to preserve themselves. They weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. They were fighting like cornered animals, and cornered animals were dangerous in ways that rational beings couldn't predict. Admiral, Velinara's voice carried across the bridge with barely contained excitement. The humans are requesting permission to coordinate with our fleet. Granted, Kexthara replied without hesitation. All ships follow their lead. If they want to fight like madmen, then we'll go mad with them. The Zephyrian fleet, energized by the humans' impossible courage, threw themselves into the battle with renewed fury. Elegant biomechanical vessels that had been designed for graceful combat suddenly became instruments of vengeance, their crews fighting with a desperation born of having nothing left to lose. What followed was the most chaotic, brutal, and glorious battle the galaxy had ever seen. Zephyrian precision combined with human fury created a symphony of destruction that sent shockwaves through the swarm's collective consciousness. For every human ship that died, it took 3 swarm bioships with it, For every Zephyrian vessel lost, the humans made the enemy pay in blood and fire. The TCDS Fury, a converted mining vessel bristling with improvised weapons, rammed itself into a swarm command biostructure, detonating its entire missile payload in the creature's neural core. The explosion sent tendrils of disrupted bioelectric energy cascading through the swarm formation, temporarily severing their hive mind connection. Admiral Okafor's voice cut through the chaos, calm and deadly. Kexathara, we're reading massive swarm reinforcements incoming from the Galactic core. Looks like we got their attention. Can your people hold against those numbers? The Zephyrian admiral asked, watching as another human vessel, the TCDS Unbroken, turned itself into a guided missile, its crew singing what sounded like battle hymns as they dove into the heart of a bio-titan. Hold! Okafor laughed, and the sound was pure human defiance distilled into audio form. Admiral, we haven't even gotten started yet. All ships, this is Admiral Okafor, initiate Protocol Prometheus. The human fleet began to change. Ships that had seemed damaged suddenly revealed hidden weapon systems. Vessels that appeared to be retreating turned and unleashed hellfire on pursuing swarm creatures. It was a trap within a trap within a trap, and the swarm was walking straight into it. What is Protocol Prometheus? Kexathora asked, her tactical displays showing energy readings that defied explanation. Something we learned from our own mythology, Okafor replied, her voice carrying a weight that made even the hardened Zephyrian admiral shiver. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Sometimes when you're fighting something bigger and stronger than you, you don't try to match its strength. You bring fire to the darkness and teach it to burn. The human ships began to glow, not with weapons fire, but with something far more dangerous. Controlled fusion reactions cascading through their hulls. They were turning themselves into bombs. Not small tactical nuclear devices, but stellar-scale explosions that could crack moons and boil oceans. You're all going to die, Velinara whispered in horror. Yeah, Okafor agreed with disturbing cheerfulness. But so are they, and that's what matters. Besides, we've been practicing dying for 3.5 centuries. We've gotten pretty good at it. The first human ship to achieve critical fusion cascade was the TCDS Vengeance, a vessel that had once been a deep space mining platform. It dove into the heart of the swarm formation and became a brief, brilliant star. The explosion vaporized everything within 1,000 kilometers and sent electromagnetic pulses racing through the bioship's neural networks. But the explosion also did something else. It sent a signal through the quantum foam, a message that reached every corner of human space in an instant. And from every human world, from every station and outpost and forgotten mining colony, the answer came back in a roar that shook the foundations of reality itself. Humanity stands. Ships began arriving from deeper in Sol's system. Not the cobbled-together weapons platforms of the first wave, but true warships, vessels that had been building in secret for months, ever since humanity first detected the swarm's approach toward their sector. The human species, it seemed, had been preparing for this moment, turning their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at the heart of entropy itself. The TCDS Indomitable emerged from a fold space jump that shouldn't have been possible for a pre-warp civilization, its hull bristling with weapons that made even the Zephyrians step back in awe. Antimatter torpedoes, gravitational collapse generators, and something that defied classification. A weapon that seemed to reach into the quantum substrate of reality and twist it into impossible shapes. This is Admiral Kofi Asante of the 2nd Terran Expeditionary Force, came the transmission from the new arrival. Sorry we're late. Had to stop and pick up the rest of the neighborhood. Behind the human fleet came others, species that had been written off as extinct or irrelevant. The crystalline architects of Tau Ceti, their ships humming with mathematical precision and barely contained stellar fire. The energy beings of the Helix Nebula, crackling with power that turned nearby asteroids into exotic matter. The machine intelligences of Kepler 442, cold logic given form and equipped with fury. No, how? Kexathara asked, her voice filled with wonder and growing hope. Turns out, Okafor replied, And you send a message to the galaxy saying that everything's going to die unless someone does something stupid and dangerous. You get a lot of volunteers. Humans just happen to be the ones crazy enough to answer first. The tide of battle began to turn. The swarm's advance, which had seemed unstoppable for 7 years, ground to a halt as they faced something they'd never encountered before. An enemy that refused to be consumed quietly. These new adversaries didn't just fight back. They infected everything around them with their defiance. The very quantum foam began to rebel against the swarm's entropy, reality itself growing thorns and teeth. A void-born bio-titan, a creature the size of a small city, found itself under assault by a combined force of human boarding parties and Zephyrian neural disruptors. The humans carved their way through the creature's living corridors with flame and fury, while the Zephyrians used their biological expertise to target the Titan's nerve centers. When the creature finally died, its death scream echoed across 17 star systems. "Admiral," Thekmoran called out, his voice carrying more hope than Kexthara had heard in years. "The swarm's formation is breaking apart. They're retreating from the outer sectors." Retreating. Kexthara could barely believe it. In 7 years of war, the swarm had never retreated. They consumed or they died. There was no middle ground, no strategic withdrawal. But here they were, pulling back from the combined fury of humanity and its newfound allies. The battle raged for 17 hours straight. When it finally ended, the swarm had learned something that would haunt them across the cosmos. Some prey fights back. Some prey has friends, and some prey will drag you into hell just to watch you burn. Admiral Kexthara found herself aboard the TCDS Phoenix, built from the wreckage of the original Defiance, and somehow even more terrifying than its predecessor. Across from her, Admiral Okafor looked exactly as tired and battle-scarred as she felt, but her eyes still held that indomitable spark that had turned the tide of the war. "Why?" the Zephyrian asked. The question that had been burning in her mind since the first human ship had emerged from Sol. "Why did you risk everything for a species you barely knew existed?" Okafor was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the debris field where both sides had bled and died. Ships that had carried the hopes and dreams of entire civilizations now drifted as silent monuments to the cost of freedom. "Because," she said finally, "someone has to draw the line. Someone has to stand up and say, 'This far, no further.' And if not us, then who?" She turned to face Kexthara, and her eyes held the weight of a species that had stared into the abyss and chosen to fight rather than fall. "Besides, we figured the galaxy could use a few more stubborn assholes. Keeps things interesting." The aftermath of the battle brought revelations that changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. The pre-warp species had been anything but primitive. They'd simply been hiding, building, preparing for a war they'd seen coming decades before anyone else. Their listening posts had detected the swarm's approach, while other species were still debating whether the threat was real. "We've been watching the galaxy destroy itself for centuries," Admiral Asante explained during the first joint strategy session. "Wars over resources, territory, ideology, while a real threat built up strength in the dark spaces between stars. We decided to do something about it." The technology humans had developed in secret was a fusion of desperate innovation and careful planning. Unable to match the elegant biotech of the Zephyrians or the energy manipulation of other advanced species, they'd focused on what they did best, taking things apart and putting them back together in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. "Humanity's greatest strength," Okafor said, "has always been our ability to adapt. We take what we have, make it work, and keep going." The swarm thought they understood warfare. They'd never met anyone who treated physics as more of a suggestion than a law. In the weeks that followed, the alliance forged in desperate battle became the foundation of something unprecedented. The Terran-Zephyrian Pact expanded to include dozens of species, each bringing their unique strengths to bear against the swarm's return. Because everyone knew they would return. The swarm had retreated, but not out of fear. They'd pulled back to adapt, to incorporate what they'd learned from their first defeat. The next time they came, they would be ready for human unpredictability and alien fury. but the galaxy would be ready too. Construction began on a new type of vessel, hybrid ships that combined human ingenuity with alien technology. The first of these, the GCDS Unity, was a testament to what could be accomplished when different species work together toward a common goal. Zephyrian biohulls merged with human weapon systems, architect mathematical processors linked to energy being power cores, all controlled by machine intelligence logic matrices. Admiral Kexthara stood on the bridge of Unity, watching as the combined fleets of the Galactic Defense Coalition spread across the Outer Rim territories. Humanity had done more than save her people. They'd shown the galaxy how to fight like it meant something, how to rage against the dying of the light, how to stand together when everything else fell apart. The swarms still lurked in the void between galaxies, licking wounds that had never healed properly. They had learned something in that first battle, learned that the galaxy had found its teeth. But they were also learning, adapting, preparing for the next phase of a war that would span eons. Let them come, Kexthara thought, her three hearts beating in rhythm with the ship's biomechanical systems. The galaxy had found its guardians, and they were absolutely, completely, utterly insane. Perfect. The message spread across 1,000 worlds, carried by quantum broadcasts and whispered prayers. Earth answers the call. Humanity stands with you, and together we hold the line. Because that's what humans do. They fight for the underdog, stand with the desperate, and turn impossible odds into just another day at the office. The galaxy had learned a new truth about war, about survival, about the kind of species that refuses to kneel. And in the cold depths of space, where light was precious and hope was a luxury few could afford, that made all the difference. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly how humanity liked it.